how do you handle a tough situation? When you are in an arguably impossible situation, how do you talk your way into a better one? And that's what we're looking at today. We are going to be talking about the defense lawyer in the trial of Derek Chauvin. Now, he's in an impossible situation. He's defending a client who, at least to me, pretty clearly did something pretty terrible. And he uses his public speaking skills in this situation to frame his argument in a much better way through things like repetition, body language, as well as changing the focus of what they're talking about away from the things that are going to make his argument less favorable and towards the things that are going to make it more favorable. Now, at the end of the day, he's in an impossible situation, but through public speaking skills, we can do better than your run-of-the-mill impossible situation, and at the very least, come out with a competent, cogent, coherent idea. To do that, it's going to be myself and Yang Fan looking at a particular piece of speaking that this lawyer did, and a particular moment where he discusses the difference between perspective and perception, I believe. Anything to add on that, Yang Fan, before we roll the video?
Only one minor point. It's a very high pressure, high stake situation. And you can see how the lawyer handled it. He's using calm voice, and he's really emotionally charged. Let's have a look, and then we can see what's happening. Now let's roll the tape.
We kind of start talking about the crowd in some limited detail. I have thought a lot during the course of this trial about the difference between perspective and perception. Perspective and perception are two distinct concepts. Perspective is the angle at which you see something. It's your perspective. Perception is how you interpret what it is that you see. I've thought about this a lot during the course of this trial because this situation here in the courtroom is incredibly unique, right? It's not the normal setup for a jury trial. So my perspective through the course of this trial, sitting in this chair, is that I cannot see 4 of the jurors. Very limited opportunity to observe the jurors. They probably can't see me either. Several of the jurors I have a very good view of. 4 of the jurors I don't, and obstructed views of others. My perspective sitting in this chair when witnesses, there's a camera blocking the head. So in order for me to see the witness, I have to roll all the way over to the other side. Then I have to look through the plexiglass that has these large reflecting lights. Right? Things block your perspective. Things can affect your perspective. But your perception is how you interpret what it is you see and what it is you experience. And that is our life, right? This is our experiences. These are the things that make us who we are. 3 people in this trial went to the same high school. Me, Darnella Frazier, and Chief Arredondo. We all went to the same high school, obviously at different times. My experience, Chief Arredondo's experience, Darnella Frazier's experience, all based on, we had the same perspective, sat in the same classrooms, saw the same chalkboards or whiteboards, the same perspective. But our perception of our experiences there is going to be much different. Ultimately, at the end of the case.
So here you have it. That was the lawyer's defense. And he really honed in a two-center idea of perception and perspective. A little bit unexpected for me, though. I thought he was going to talk about the case itself, about what perspective others see and what actually happened during that tragedy. But it takes an unexpected turn for me. He talked about the perception perspective of people in the room, the jurors, the police officers, and people, someone else involved in this case and sitting in the room. That to me, though, he's using some emotional connection with the audience, try to help them to separate the perception and perspective and drive the argument to his favor. And this content bit is why I don't really expect it. in terms of delivery here, he didn't let himself be constrained by the plexiglass box. Actually, he used that to his own advantage to a bit. He said, I will turn around about to see the people. He used the plexiglass to turn. And that's action to demonstrate, to see a different perspective. You need to put in some effort and to see it. So his arguments are quite different, quite unique in this sense. And that's just my major comment on the content here is something I is not really expecting what he's saying, and this high pressure place. And look back to my question proposed, in this high stakes situation, he's incredibly calm. I guess he has to. If he's emotionally charged, he's probably gonna get a flush to his head, couldn't think carefully through the situation. But enough of my side, let's hear about what Aaron thinks in this delivery on the content part.
So just as a response to what you said, first of all, I think if he tried to go emotional, the issue he'd run into is emotions are running against him already, right? He's not on the side of emotion in this case because the emotions, and I think rightly so, are very much against his client. His client gets messed up. So if he tries to win emotion over, he's going to lose on that on its own. So he has to stick with logical. And I actually think it's interesting what he did in starting by referring to the courtroom saying, here, the jurors are over there, the witnesses over there, because what I think he was doing, and I don't know, what I think he was doing is he's taking focus off the facts of the trial for a minute to help people, one, refocus on what he's talking about and get them to agree with him. It's like this idea of, okay, instead of talking about this subject where there's a lot of pre-existing opinions, let's talk about this different one. And I want you to agree with me on this thing first. Do you agree in this totally inane, harmless situation that this makes sense? Great. Now let's apply it to something closer. You can work an argument into a final idea by starting with something really far away. As long as you get people to agree with you along the way, it forces them to agree with you in the end. And that might have been what he was trying to do. Of course, he does.
It's very possible.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know Canadian law, let alone US law. So I think in terms of delivery, he does do a lot for himself with his delivery, particularly his body language. As Yang Fan said, he uses the space really effectively. He's always pointing to where he's talking about. And this is something we should always do. If we're talking about something being over there, right, even if the thing we're talking about isn't actually over there, but it's only over there in our mind. Like I'm imagining being in front of my child at home, something's over there, I point. It gives the audience a feeling of context and situation. They start to imagine being in the speaker's shoes as opposed to observing the speaker. They start to imagine what the speaker's talking about in a first person perspective. So I think that's really an important thing to do with their body language. His voice could vary more. He could get more emphasis and really start to plant the idea of what he's getting at, right? I don't know whether the perception or the perspective is more important in this case, what he's trying to get across. He hasn't emphasized it. It would be nice if he would say one word slightly differently, then I can understand what his point is earlier. Ultimately, he's making an argument for what I consider a lost cause, but he does it really well. And I think that's something that even if he's making an argument for something I don't agree with, I can respect the skill necessary to make that argument. And I think the takeaway is if you want to argue a point you think is going to be difficult, start far away and lead into it. The other side of it is use your body to communicate information. And lastly, be aware of where the emotions are in the world. If people on average disagree with you from a very emotional perspective, don't come for that perspective. Don't try and argue in terms that you're guaranteed to lose. Argue in terms that work for you. I think those are the three things that speaking teaches us. Of course, I do think we should try and use our voice a little more effectively through emphasis, but he does do well given a difficult, high pressure, potentially impossible situation.
Yeah, that is a very, very difficult situation. And that is why I find a very unique case of public speaking here. And the one thing really catch my attention is how emotional he is. I think he might make conscious decision there, as the reason Aaron said. It comes across really well. I can feel he's really logical, really factual in his voice and his way of presenting. And if that's his goal, he definitely delivered it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is intentional and it makes sense to be in this case. But who knows? We're not in his head, and although he ultimately lost, there are lessons to be learned from the things he did. I don't think I have anything else to add, so I'll just say this. Thank you very much for your time. Stay fishy out there. Anything else, Yang-Fan?
No, I will be speaking with you next time for maybe next difficult conversation.